Oh, we're not going with the countdown.
Oh, whoops.
Okay. All right. Well, hello and welcome to the undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Jon Kelly. We're going to be talking UFC Vegas 41 going down this weekend at the Apex facility in Las Vegas, Nevada. We got a middleweight main event here between Marvin Vettori and Paulo Costa. 14 fights on the card. Jon, my man, tell the people, how are you doing? You're a little laugh heavy to start the show here.
Yeah, you're making me laugh, dude. What are you doing now? No, we got 14 fights. I'm excited. Fun DraftKings slate. Have a few betting spots. You have more betting spots than me. Definitely looking to add a few props. For some reason, they removed the Baby Shark fight for whatever reason, but now it's back up, but they didn't re-release the props on that, which is interesting. But yeah, there's definitely a few spots that I feel pretty good about. I know you do as well, so I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, so 14 fights. I will say there's a bunch of spots where I do have bets on the card. But there's also a bunch of fights where I really have no type of opinion. I think we have 4 UFC debutants, a couple of short notice fights put together this weekend. So let's get started here with our first kind of short notice fight. We got Jonathan Martinez against Zvad Laza. Hopefully I didn't butcher that name completely. It's Laza UFC debut. Kid fought in LFA. Pretty highly touted Georgian prospect, undefeated at this point. I believe he was scheduled to debut a few weeks ago. But got the call this week. I think it was Aaron Phillips that pulled out of the Jonathan Martinez fight. So a lot of market respect here for Laza. I've listened to him on LFA. I've listened to his LFA fight 4 times back to try and hear the announcers pronounce it. And I'm just continuing to butcher it. But getting a lot of market respect here. He's minus 130. Jonathan Martinez, obviously been in the UFC for a minute, has had some issues making weight, had a fight scrapped. I think it was last month because he couldn't make the weight at 135 pounds. So interesting matchup here, Jon. What do you have for me in the first fight of the night? Because the guy is getting a lot of respect here. Schfieli is getting a lot of respect from the market. Do you think it's mostly just due to he's a Georgian wrestler, or do you think this guy's legit good and deserves to be a favorite in this spot on short notice?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see the opener here. I definitely get the angle. Martinez gives up the takedowns. Martinez is never somebody that I'm really impressed with. I don't think you're super high on him either. His takedown defense is kind of weak. He's obviously facing a wrestler, grappler in Schfieli, but Schfieli, you want to talk about a padded record. He's fought literally, I had to do a double take because all of his opponents up to his last 2 fights were 0-0. Every single one of them. That just doesn't happen very often. And I know he has a decent skill set here, but this is a lot of market respect. Like you said, minus 188 against a UFC veteran like Jonathan Martinez, who I know we're not super high on, but he's been in there with some much better fighters than I think Schfieli has. And I don't know, man. I think this one is kind of dog or pass, just on the sense that Martinez is probably the better striker. He just needs to keep the fight on the feet. It's just that I don't trust him to be able to do that. So I'm not really taking a dog shot, but I got to look into Schfieli more, because this was a short notice replacement. I didn't get a ton of time to look into the matchup here, so I don't have a strong take. But just my first thought is that this is a little bit too much respect for the UFC newcomer.
Yeah, I kind of think that, well, first of all, this price opened, I should have said this kind of off the top, but this price opened at minus 210 for the UFC newcomer, and I thought that was a lot of respect. I know that Schfieli has not fought a great strength of schedule to this point kind of in his career, and I acknowledge that, but you go back, and I think that this kid is going to be pretty decent, but a minus 210 price tag was kind of at one extreme of where I think his outcomes could land. There's a lot of unknowns, certainly the toughest test he's fought to date this weekend coming up. So I thought minus 210, he would have to be in the 90th percentile of what we're kind of expecting from him in order to cover a price like that. I do think a price around minus 150, minus 130 is correct. I think he'll be able to win round 1 pretty comfortably here with the grappling. I have some cardio concerns. Saw him slow down in the Josh Huber fight on LFA in round 3. A little bit concerning against Jonathan Martinez. But for the most part, man, Martinez is just very kick heavy. He's decent at it, but takedown defense hasn't always been fantastic. I look-y think he's like pretty fragile. Obviously, was knocked out by Davy Grant. He's been knocked down in multiple fights previous to that. So I'm not betting Martinez here, but I would probably need like a plus number on Laza Schfieli in order to take a shot on him in the debut on short notice. All right, let's move on to the second fight of the night. And as I mentioned off the top, there's a couple of fights where I feel really strongly about this weekend, and then there's fights like Lavina Souza versus Randa Marcos where I just kind of have no opinion and kind of would prefer not to talk about it. To be honest, we have Souza minus 130, Marcos small underdog plus 110. DK prices here are Souza 8.3K. Marcos is 7.9. To me, man, this is a fight that I just don't want to be really anywhere close for. I know there's a bunch of people who kind of have consistently been betting Randa Marcos. And I will say that Randa Marcos, I thought, looked pretty good in her last fight. I know she was kind of taken down a bunch of times with that throw against Pinheiro, but then her opponent kind of quit with the illegal strike. There's a DQ involved. I thought Marcos was probably on her way to coming back in that fight. I thought she looked decent. This is just a low level fight to me, man. Like Souza can really only win by getting on top, but I think it's fairly likely that she's able to do that at some point. And with Randa Marcos, like she's a decent striker to the point where I think she's going to win the striking comfortably here, but her fight IQ is so low, man. Like she's jumping into Mackenzie Dern's guard and stuff like that. I just can't trust her in a fight where I think she has the advantage in one facet of the game, striking, and I think she's at a disadvantage in a different facet of the game, grappling. I just can't trust her. Even at plus 110, I can't trust her to take a small underdog shot here. So I think it's a pretty irrelevant fight for DraftKings. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, John, but for the most part, I just think it's a pass and one that I'm happy having no action on come this weekend. What about you?
Yeah, I'm basically in the same boat. Like, if I gun to my head, if I had to bet this fight, I would say Randa Marcos is probably the side, but I mean, this is a spot where like I'm not high on either fighter here. Like Livana Souza is somebody that I've historically been looking to fade. And Randa Marcos is probably not the right fighter to fade her with, in the sense that like her fight IQ is not really there. Like you mentioned, like the way she wins fights is a lot of the same things that Livana Souza tries to do. So it's like, I just think this has split decision written all over it. In that situation, like I'd rather have the dog in that fight, but overall, like I'd rather have neither, to be honest, on a 14 fight slate. Like I think there's just better fights to target. And I have no action in terms of the betting market, so we don't have to spend too much time on it.
Yeah, let's move on to our to the next fight here, which I actually think should be a pretty entertaining fight. We got Jeff Molina as a minus 160 favorite. He's coming off a pretty impressive UFC debut, really great fight against Iori Kulang. That was at UFC 261. Molina landed 200 strikes almost in that fight, knocked his opponent down 2 times. I think they won fight of the night. But he's coming back. It's his second fight in the UFC, and he takes on a newcomer here in Daniel Da Silva. So Da Silva is listed in some places as Daniel Lacerda. In some places, it's Da Silva. We're going to go with Da Silva for the purposes of the show because I think that's what like the UFC stat page is going with. But regardless, they meet this weekend. We got Molina minus 160, Da Silva plus 140. And I think this is going to be a pretty fun fight kind of from the get-go, John. I went back, watched the tape here on Da Silva. This is a guy who comes out early on in fights, and his goal is to get his opponent out pretty much as soon as possible. He has 12 career fights. He's lost one of them, and only one of them has reached the second round. So he's certainly a guy who's just kind of coming for your head early. There's not much tape available on him, I will say, despite having 12 fights. A lot of them are on the Brazilian regional scene. I think I found about 8 to 9 minutes total of his fighting just in general on tape, stuff that I could find like widely accessible. What I will say is he comes out super aggressive. I think he has decent kicks in terms of the striking. I know that many people think of him kind of as a grappler. I'm not sure he'll be able to have kind of success here taking down Molina. We have seen Molina taken down 5 times between his Dana White Contender Series fight and his UFC debut, but his get-up game is pretty solid, man. He spent like 3 minutes total on his back, always looking to get up, get to the fence, get to a hip, escape, stuff like that when he's taken down. So I don't really think that Lacerda or Da Silva, is going to have much success in the grappling realm here. I do think that, it'll be a firefight early, but in the end, I kind of favor the striking of Molina. I do think his boxing is pretty solid, good durability, is able to keep a pretty strong pace for the entirety of a 15 minutes. So I think Molina is the side. I'm probably not going to back him at minus 160. The market did drop, I will say, to like minus 140 for a second yesterday. Was intrigued by that price. I do think another spot to look is the total on this fight. But John, I think you actually have a bet already on the total here. So I'll toss to you to let you talk about that one, and then we'll move on to the next fight.
Yeah, I played the under 2.5 here. I just think it's kind of recency bias in the sense that Molina is coming off the decision win on Dana White Contender Series, like you mentioned, but then the decision win against I always butcher his name, but Kai Lang Iori or whatever.
Yeah.
That one went the full distance, even though there was a lot of back and forth in that fight as well. You know, Molina was rocked at the end of the third. Iori ate a bunch of big shots there. Like, coming into the UFC, Molina was known as a finisher. Like I think 6 of his 9 wins have come by finish. And then on the flip side, Lacerda or Silva, whatever you want to call him, he's basically finishing every single one of his fights in the first round. He's had one fight reach the second round in his entire career. Every other fight has ended in the first round. So, and it's not that I think he's like terrible. Like, I think obviously his win condition is an early finish. He's very aggressive. You mentioned the kicks, like he's super flashy. He seems to have power on the feet, but he's also like an opportunistic grappler. I think he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like, if he does get the fight to the mat, like maybe he can pull off a sub, but I'd be kind of surprised. Molina seems like a decent defensive grappler. I think he's a purple belt as well and trains out a good camp at Glory MMA. So I think he'll be fine on the mat, but more than likely, I think Lacerda, his win condition is an early finish, but more than likely, I think Molina just takes over late, taxes the cardio of Lacerda, and probably gets a finish in the second or third round. So I played the under 2.5 at plus 122. I just don't think we should be getting plus money on this fight, where I think we're going to see a lot of action. We have one fighter who's only been around out of the first round one time in his career. The cardio is untested. He's a finisher himself as well. Like, both guys are capable of finishing. I just don't think we should see plus money here on the under 2.5. So I played at plus 122 for a unit. I'm expecting a finish here, and I think this is a pretty decent target on DraftKings as well. And if you like the Molina side, I think round 2 or round 3 props are super live here.
Yeah, I do too. I think our buddy, friend of the show, Narco Cop, bet like Molina TKO in round 3 at some like ridiculous like 20-1 price, something like that. Narco Cop did, and I think that's a decent look here. I think I'm probably going to end up betting the under as well with you here, John. Like, it's hard to tell where De Silva is at in terms of his skill level, because there's 3 fights that I saw, and one of them, which is his second pro fight, and it's kind of unfair to judge the guy on it's almost 4.5 years ago at this point. He's had 10 fights since then, but he spends like the entirety of the round, or really the fight, on his back, and then gets a triangle from the bottom, which, you know, triangles on the regional scene from the bottom kind of speak more to poor defensive wrestling than like really good grappling, in my opinion. And then another fight I saw, he just head kicked the guy in 25 seconds and knocked him out. So I don't really like, I think it's tough to evaluate exactly where De Silva is in terms of his skill level, but I don't think it's difficult to kind of gather that, like, hey, this guy is going to be early finish or likely bust. And I do think that he's just going to kind of be an under machine. We'll see how it plays out, but I do like the under look in this fight. Another fight where I like the under as well, we'll move on here, is Jai Herbert versus Kama Worthy. We got Herbert as a minus 185 favorite. Kama Worthy comes back plus 160. The DraftKings prices are Herbert 8.8K and Worthy 7.4K. Late last night, I played this fight not to start round 3 at minus 132. I only bet it for a unit, mostly because I couldn't get down more than that on FanDuel, and nobody was up to help me get down more than that if I needed it. And basically my read here is like, these guys are not only finishers when they win, but they're getting finished a lot when they lose in this matchup. You look at this fight, and like, first of all, we'll start with Kama Worthy. This guy's chin is like pretty much complete dust at this point. I mean, he has 8 career losses, I think it is. 7 of them have come in the first round or under 7.5 minutes. He consistently gets finished. He's been knocked out in round 1 in his last 3 losses, including 2 consecutive fights. And like, we've seen, it's kind of a deal where like, it's not taking massive shots to put this guy out. Like, I know Ottman is as much as I think he's a flawed fighter, he hits hard, but like Jamie Malarkey got a knockout in his last fight as well. But like, I was not expecting Malarkey to go out there and knock out Worthy within a minute, and he did. It just kind of feels like sometimes the first shot puts this guy away. So I think that his durability is significantly kind of like, I don't know how you would describe it. I think he has a good chance of getting hurt early on in this fight, is what I will say. And then on the flip side with Jai Herbert, this is a guy who I faded in terms of the money line and bet an under against in the Renato Moicano fight his last time out. So one thing I'll say here about Herbert is, first of all, his durability isn't that great either. Like, we've seen this guy get knocked out in the first round on Cage Warriors. Obviously, we saw the Trinaldo knockout in his UFC debut for Herbert, but I do think that this guy has some skills, man. Like, I think his grappling is pretty terrible. That was kind of my read going into the Moicano fight, but his hands are decent, man. Like, he puts together pretty good combinations. He'll throw leg kicks as well. Like, I think that Herbert has a real chance to hurt Worthy on the feet. And at the same time, I think Worthy can hurt him back. And I also think that Worthy, should the fight hit the ground, which I'm not fully expecting it to, you know, Kama Worthy is not a guy who's out there to consistently shoot takedowns, but we have seen him get a little bit crafty with his submission game in the past. And like, Jai Herbert, for as decent as I think his hands are, he might be like one of the worst grapplers in the UFC in terms of fighters who like aren't terrible. You know what I mean? Like, there's some fighters who are just really bad all the way around and like bottom tier. I don't think Herbert is quite there, but for guys outside of the bottom tier, his grappling is like super poor. So only one submission loss on his record, but I wouldn't be surprised if Worthy could get a sub. So yeah, I bet does not start round 3 minus 132. I think variance, I think it's like 1.5 at plus money at this point, under 1.5 rounds. I think that's a decent look. I just like violence in this spot. I'll pick Herbert. I think he knocks Kama Worthy out in round 1. John, what do you have on this fight between Herbert and Worthy?
Yeah, I really like that number on doesn't start round 3. I actually played a similar prop on this fight. I actually played doesn't start round 2 at a plus 180 on FanDuel. That's off market a little bit. You know, I saw a couple offshores open that, or we're hovering around plus 130. So a little bit of CLV there, assuming that FanDuel does correct to the rest of the market. And I think it will. Like, people are going to bet this line. I just think, like you mentioned, like, both of these guys have serious durability concerns. Worthy been knocked out 7 of his 8 losses. Herbert's only been knocked out twice, but we've seen him rocked multiple times. You mentioned the grappling sucks as well. Like, but both of these guys, they want to stand and trade. And I just think that's going to happen until somebody drops. Like, even if Worthy comes out with like a grapple heavy game plan, like, whatever, I'm still fine with playing fight doesn't start round 2 at plus 180, because like you said, I think Worthy could probably submit him if he does get it to the ground. But also, I honestly think just like somebody probably dies at the first heavy exchange on the feet. So at plus 180, you know, that's like what, 35% implied that it ends in the first round. I have it at a much higher clip than that. So I played it for 1.5 units. I like that number. I like your number as well on doesn't start round 3. I just think any sort of under or violence bet in this fight is probably good. So in terms of DraftKings, I think you can probably target either side. I would lean Jai Herbert just because I think his durability is slightly better. But I think either guy winning by knockout in the first round would not surprise me one bit.
Yeah, agree there. And now we will move on to what I consider like the John Kelly special portion of the show, because we got what I think is your underdog of the week here, and then we got your girl Tabitha Ricci, and then we got your guy who cashed for you a few months back when you're on an island in Mariano. So those fights are kind of all coming out. There's one between them, but this is what we would call the John Kelly special portion of the fight. So I'll kick a bunch of these to you first, John, and let you get your takes out there, because I know you certainly have a lot of them coming in. But let's go to the first fight here. We got Laureano Starpoli minus 225, $9,000 on DK against Jamie Pickett plus 190, 7.2K for Jamie Pickett on Contender Series. And I could start off by talking about how Jamie Pickett had to fight 3 times on Dana White Contender Series to get a UFC contract. I could talk about him being outclassed in his UFC debut against Stefan Nchukwi, or I could talk about him getting flatlined by Jordan Wright in the first minute of their fight in his second UFC fight. But instead of me going first, John, I will let you go first here and defend your guy, Jamie Pickett here. I'm pretty sure you bet it like a pretty big number here. Talk to me about the process behind your bet and kind of what went into the thinking here.
Yeah, you know, call me a sick puck, call me a fish, like call me whatever you want, but I'm probably just going to blind bet any guy that has any sense of wrestling going up against a one-dimensional striker that really doesn't impress me whatsoever. And that's what we have here in Leonardo Starpoli. Like, yeah, his striking's okay, like it's fine, but he's not super high volume. He doesn't show a ton of power. and that's really all he does. And in all of his losses, we've seen him struggle to defend takedowns. In all of his UFC losses, that's why he lost. He was taken down multiple times, and his only UFC wins came against fighters that are no longer with the promotion. And now when you look at Jamie Pickett, like, yeah, he's not a great fighter, and so obviously people are like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm sure I'm probably one of the only people backing Jamie Pickett here, but at least Pickett has shown, like, in almost every single one of his fights, not just in the UFC, but even on the regional scene, he's gone to the wrestling a bit. And I really don't think he'll get much, pushback from Starpoli in terms of the wrestling. Like, I think he can land takedowns here. Like, even in the striking, like, I don't think he's a massive dog. Like, yes, I favor Starpoli in the striking, but I don't think it's like a massive edge. And whereas Pickett, I think, he has a 9-inch reach advantage. He's going to be longer. He's going to be bigger. I think he could land takedowns here. So I just don't think he should be plus 200. And that's really what it comes down to. I line this fight a lot closer than plus 200. So I took the dog shot on Pickett at plus 198 for a unit. And I'm okay with being on an island. I'm like I said, I'm almost always going to take the guy with some sense of wrestling going up against a guy who can't defend takedowns, because stylistically speaking, he's probably going to give up minutes and give up rounds to the wrestler. So I'm okay with taking the shot on Jamie Pickett here. I think people are sleeping on him just because he was finished by the Beverly Hills Ninja in his last fight.
Yeah, it's interesting when you had mentioned that. I thought you'd be on an island as well. When you said you were betting Pickett, you thought you'd be on an island. I took a look at Bet MMA tips. It looks like there's not a bunch, but it's not a very heavily bet fight, which is kind of predictable. It's not a great matchup to the casual eye, but it looks like there's a few people with you on the Pickett train, so not totally alone this weekend. In terms of my read on the fight, I largely agree with like the whole take anybody with a semblance of wrestling credentials against Laureano Starpoli. My issue is I just don't think Jamie Pickett is like that good of a wrestler. And I know Starpoli has a 52% takedown defense, but the matchups he's faced, man, like Muslim Salikov, Tim Means, Roman Dolidze, like I think those guys are levels above Jamie Pickett in terms of the wrestling and just kind of their overall game. Jamie Pickett is someone who I faded on Contender Series. I think I actually faded him in the one Contender Series fight that got him to the UFC, right? Like he went 0-2 on Contender Series, right? Like he lost to Puna, and he also lost to, I think, Charles Byrd, who retired from MMA. Charles Byrd is like one of my all-time nemesis in terms of betting, because like I bet on the guy and he retired like 3 minutes after the fight. Like he certainly already had his Instagram post all planned out, all that type of stuff. And I just went like a sick fish and lost money betting on him in the retirement fight. But in all seriousness here, like I understand the Pickett shot. I just don't really see anything in his game that's going to give Starpoli trouble. I think if they kickbox, it'll be kind of a blowout in terms of that realm. But look, I can't blame you. It's plus 200 against a guy in Laureano Starpoli who's one-dimensional and not even that great at that one dimension he specializes in. So I'll pick Starpoli. I don't necessarily think he's like a terrible parlay piece, but certainly not someone who I'm having any money on this weekend. And John, real quick, before we move on, like what do you make of this fight for DraftKings? Because with 14 fights, we can get kind of selective here in terms of what fights, what fighters we want to target, as opposed to some of these weeks where we've had like an 18 fighter player pool. It's nice to have 14 this weekend, 28 fighter pool. Hopefully everything stays intact tomorrow. What do you make of this fight? Because currently the odds on this fight to go to decision are like minus 175, but we've seen in Jamie Pickett fights in the past, like this guy certainly has finishing ability, put together a beautiful combo on Contender Series to make the UFC. Like, are you going to be pretty heavily exposed to Pickett at 7.2K? It's kind of one of your primary underdogs on DK.
No, I mean, I'm okay with taking the dog shot because I think the line is wide. But in terms of DraftKings, like I think you're okay. Like on a 14 fight slate, I don't think you have to force anything. Like I would definitely get some exposure to him, but I wouldn't make him like a core underdog or anything like that. Like also too, like you got to put some respect on him. Like he wasn't 0-2 in Dana White Contender Series. He was 1-2. He did beat
Oh yeah, he won his last one. That's the one I lost
so
my bet on.
So he wasn't 0-2. And to be fair, like he landed multiple takedowns against Charles Byrd, your boy. He landed one against Pati. He didn't land, I don't think he landed any against Puna, but Puna's a solid defensive wrestler. He was in on a double leg against Jordan Wright. That's what got him finished against the Beverly Hills Ninja. Like he's aggressively at least looking to wrestle in most of his fights. And that's really all I'm looking for here, because if outside of Starpoli improvements, like I think he could land takedowns here. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, if he gets stuck at range, like he's a dead fish more than likely, like he doesn't throw enough volume, not super powerful. So it is what it is, but plus 200, I'm almost always going to take that shot on the better wrestler, in my opinion. But to answer your question, I don't think you have to force it in terms of making him like a core underdog piece. And on the flip side, if Starpoli wins, I think it likely comes from a decision, striking based decision, no takedowns, not a ton of volume. So I think there's just better fights to target on this slate.
Yeah, I agree. And let me be clear, like I'm not telling you I'm not taking the plunge here on Pickett, the way that you almost talked me into it a few weeks ago on Felipe Colares in a similar spot. But I'm certainly not like planting my flag on the lay minus 235 with Starpoli Hill. Just so we're clear here. Let's move on to the next fight. And my guess is I won't do much talking for this one either. We got Tabitha Ricci, Baby Shark, John's girl, John's MMA crush here. Got the little shark going on the screen. For those of you watching live on YouTube, we appreciate you guys tuning in for moments like that. We got Tabitha Ricci. She's minus 260 here, coming off of a loss to Manon Fiorot, where she took the fight on short notice, up a weight class against a fighter who I think is going to turn out to be like perennial top 10, top 5 in a weight class at 125 that just isn't super saturated by a ton of striking talent. And so tough spot for Ricci. Obviously, the market is not putting a ton of like, really, the market isn't really valuing that result. I'll say to Fiorot, she is a minus 260 favorite, and she fights Maria Oliveira, I believe is what the UFC is going with. She is making her UFC debut here. She's plus 220, I should say, $7,300 on DraftKings. And John, I said I'll kick it to you first, but like I go back and watch this girl, Maria Oliveira's tape. Dude, she is not UFC level, I think, is the best way to put it. And I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'll let you go first here. But just kind of start us off. Like, I don't know, take it however you want. I know Tabitha Ricci's your girl, but for those of people who haven't gone back and watched Maria Oliveira fight, kind of what are you expecting from her in her debut this weekend?
Yeah, I'm not expecting much from her debut, to be honest with you. I think the UFC knows that, you know, the fan base is ready to get behind Baby Shark here, both literally and figuratively. But I think that this is like a tailor-made matchup for her, in the sense that, like, you know, her matchup is, like you said, probably not UFC level. Like, she's been submitted twice on the regional scene. She's given up takedowns. Obviously, people want to point to the Dana White Contender Series fight where she kind of quit against Marina Rodriguez. You know, I'm not faulting her too much for that. It's really just the defensive wrestling, the defensive grappling. That's more of a red flag to me, because I don't think this one plays out on the feet very much. I expect Ricci to land takedowns here, and she's just levels better on the mat. You know, all the fanboy stuff aside from both of us, like, she just honestly is better, like significantly better on the mat. Even on the feet, like, I guess you can say it'd be even on the feet, but like, I don't even think she's like a dog on the feet. But obviously we want to see her land takedowns here. She's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, black belt in Judo as well. I expect her to land takedowns, and she really is levels better once the fight does hit the mat. So I expect her to land takedowns. It's just a matter of when she gets the finish, in my opinion. I think she gets the submission. I think it likely comes early. So I think she's a strong play on DraftKings, and I think she probably covers the price tag here, even though it's a steep one for somebody who, you know, is 0-1 in the UFC. But again, I'm not going to falter too much for going up against a killer in Manon Fiorot.
Yeah, I think that's a fair handicap. Narco in the chat was saying, you know, he's not impressed by Baby Shark. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily impressed with her skill set, but I do think that it's going to be enough here.
She impresses me.
You mentioned the discrepancy on the ground, and I really think that's where Ricci's going to win the fight. The thing that I'm kind of most concerned about with Ricci at a minus 260 price tag from a straight bet money line perspective or a parlay is kind of the size discrepancy at 115 pounds here back at her. It's just at 115. It's at her normal weight class, moving back down. She's still going to be the significantly smaller fighter at 115. You know, the UFC lists this as a 4-inch height advantage for Oliveira. There's no official reach listed, but it's going to be an advantage there as well. And I do think there's, not a massive chance, but there's a small chance that like Ricci would get stuck at range with this girl, in which case I do not want to be holding minus 260. I think the best way to play Tabitha Ricci this weekend is, first of all, there's an early prop on her to win by submission at like almost plus 400 on FanDuel. John, I think you were the one who had texted me about that earlier in the week. Was that like a real thing that happened on FanDuel? Because I see the price now is a lot
plus
closer
380. Plus
Yeah,
380 was the opener on FanDuel.
I think if you got that was a great bet. Obviously, I think the way to go at this point is something more along the lines of inside the distance, because it could be a discrepancy on the ground where like Ricci just gets to a dominant position and is able to win via ground and pound. So I'm not sure what would you prefer at this point, John, like inside the distance or submission if you had the choice between the two props. I'm going to find a price right now on DK. We have Tabitha Ricci to win by submission is down to plus 260. Plus 260
so it got
now.
Hit again.
Yeah, okay. So certainly some money coming in. Like, would you still be kind of hitting that price, or would you take a little extra safety and a worse price for inside the distance? You think like most of the win equity or finish equity sub?
I do, yeah. I just think like that's clearly her easiest path to victory. Like I said, like the submission is clear. I don't think her opponent could really defend submissions, and I just think she's much better in terms of the grappling. Like I think the submission's clear, and honestly, like a TKO finish at 115 pounds, like I just don't think it's super likely. Even though she did quit against Rodriguez, but Rodriguez is a killer. Let's be honest. And I know like Narco, he's our boy. He said it doesn't, her black belt doesn't show versus low level opponents. I don't know, man. I definitely saw some of it. Like I know she fought some bums in like LFA or some other promotions, but like what was it? Her last fight before UFC or the one before that, like takes down her opponent immediately, like basically Habib's her, like exactly what Habib did to Justin Gaethje. Like that's what she did, and she did it in like 45 seconds or whatever. Like I like Ricci here. It's not that I think I'm like super high on her or whatever, but in terms of the matchup, like I honestly don't even think it's close. I think she rolls here, and I think she gets the sub.
Yeah, let's move on to the next fight before we do any more Tabitha Ricci and Habib Nurmagomedov comparisons on the show.
Wait.
No, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
No. I wasn't going to say that, but you were going to say she might be the smaller fighter here. Her opponent actually used to fight at atom weight.
Yeah,
at 105. So I don't know if you were talking about her opponent or her, but like I actually think Ricci will be fine in terms of the size.
Well, I think Ricci's like a lot thicker than her, no pun intended, but like it's certainly a height disadvantage in terms of like the kickboxing range. Like Oliveira is going to be much taller than her. She's just like a tall and skinny type of build. Although she has fought at atomweight. That's a good shout right there. Let's move on to the next fight. And something I want to mention with this fight, we have Mason Jones against UFC newcomer taking this fight on short notice in David Onama. This fight does not have prices on DraftKings currently, and another fight that doesn't have DK prices was the first fight on the card between Laza Schfieli and Martinez. I forgot to mention that off the top. So obviously look for those two things to come out. Probably, I don't know, it's Thursday afternoon at this point, probably tonight or early tomorrow at the very latest. Me and you, John, will be in the FTN Daily Discord talking about the prices. They should be pretty straightforward. Like DraftKings prices are not tough to project in terms of the MMA product. So I just wanted to mention that here. But in terms of the fight between Jones and Onama, man, Mason Jones to me looks like he's a legitimate top 15 sort of prototype. Even at this point in his career, went out there, had a fight of the night where he lost against Mike Davis, super competitive fight in his debut. Obviously had a lot of success in Cage Warriors. I wasn't fully sold on him in Cage Warriors just because I thought his defensive striking was a little bit, left a little bit to be desired. And I don't necessarily feel differently, but he has a pretty good, well-rounded MMA game. Came out against Alan Patrick. I know that fight ended in a no contest last time out, and Patrick pulled out this time. It kind of tells you all you need to know about that fight. It was pretty one-sided up to the no contest for those of you who haven't seen it, man. I think Mason Jones probably deserves to be minus 400 here. In terms of the people who haven't seen Onama fight, he fights out of Glory MMA, which is nice. Obviously a solid camp. He's undefeated, 27 years old. Like I think this kid can win UFC fights. Seems to have power in his hands, has finished all of his fights, had a nice knockout in his last fight. The thing about Onama, man, is like he kind of screams like a little bit raw to me in terms of his skill set. Like he's a little bit green. He hits hard, really good athlete from the looks of it, but hasn't been extended a ton in his fights. Haven't seen a ton of his defensive wrestling in terms of like him being successful defending takedowns, which I think he could potentially face here for Mason Jones. It's a big price tag at minus 400. I'm not laying the chalk by any means with Mason Jones, but like for people who are into parlays and that sort of stuff, I think you could do a lot worse than a minus 400 price here. I kind of expect Mason Jones to pay it off here. And I think Onama can win fights at this level, but this is a tough assignment on short notice in terms of his UFC debut. John, what do you think here in the debutante versus Mason Jones?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add, honestly. Like, I think we're all on the same page. Like, Onama, like, not a terrible prospect. I don't think anybody thinks he's like a bum coming in here. But at the same time, like, this is just a massive step up in competition. Like, it's just too much too soon on short notice. Yes, he trains out of a good camp. Yes, he does have some power. And Jones doesn't move his head. He's super hittable. But at the same time, like, we know Jones is super durable as well. And we've seen him go a hard 15 and he does have power himself. Like, I think Jones is fine here. Like, maybe we'll wait and look to target Onama in a better spot on a full camp. But I just don't think this is the spot here. So I think Mason Jones likely gets a finish. So I think he's the side. And in terms of DraftKings, I think he's the play as well.
Yeah, the DK prices haven't come out yet. We currently have the most expensive fighter on the slate as Grant Dawson, who's $9,300. And then we have Sungwoo Choi is the second most expensive fighter on the slate. He's 9.2K. Mason Jones is a much bigger favorite than Sungwoo Choi. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out on DraftKings as 9.4K, but he also might be 9.3K, which would obviously kind of, I think, divide the ownership between him and Grant Dawson a little bit. That's kind of a conversation we can have throughout the week in the Discord as we start building lineups and getting into that sort of process. Let's move on to the next fight here, which I think is honestly one of the best fights on the card in terms of a evenly matched, highly skilled fight between Jun Young Park and Gregory Rodriguez. I read that backward because Rodriguez has actually flipped to the favorite here. So Gregory Rodriguez opened as a small underdog. He's now steamed up to minus 130 in some spots. We have minus 120 running along the ticker. That's kind of the consensus market price here is Rodriguez minus 120 with Park as an even money plus 100 underdog, but certainly was some line movement that did come in, some money backing Rodriguez in this spot. And I got to say, I kind of understand it, man. Like I've been backing Jun Young Park on his current run. I believe I bet him against Stefan in his last time out. I know for a fact that I think I either max bet him or almost max bet him like 4 or 5 units against John Phillips before that. I really like the skill set of Jun Young Park. He's just kind of a durable guy, moves forward, good cardio, not like a great technical wrestler in terms of like this guy would compete at a high level in the sport of wrestling. But he's able to kind of string it together, works behind a really strong jab for MMA. I like this kid. But on the other side, we have kind of more of a hot commodity, I would say. His stock is rising faster in terms of how the market views him and probably how the fan base views him in Gregory Rodriguez, because he came on Contender Series and he was a big favorite. And I think what was the main event of the card, not that that really matters, but pretty much got put out cold by Jordan Williams. And we know at this point that Jordan Williams is probably not a UFC level guy, despite moving down to his proper weight class. But then we saw Gregory Rodriguez go out, have a couple of wins on LFA, turn around, and like I think it was a 2-week span at the end of May into June. He made his UFC debut right after that. So he fought on LFA and then like 2 weeks later stepped in against Dusko Todorovic and had a pretty impressive win there in a fight where myself and I think a lot of people were kind of underestimating him. I don't want to say we were underestimating him based on the tape we had seen, but he certainly outperformed my expectations in that fight. He landed takedowns. He significantly outstruck Darko by almost a 2 times margin. Like it was an impressive fight for Rodriguez. So I understand why he's flipped to the favorite. I understand why the money is coming in here. My favorite play on the fight is the over 2.5 rounds. I played it last night at minus 150. I think there's a little bit of room to play that until about minus 160, minus 165. Basically, I just don't think that Jun Young Park is a massive finishing has massive finishing upside at the UFC level. This is a guy who on the regional scene was not a massive finisher. And we know over the long term that guys who don't finish at a super high clip on the regional scene, it is very rare you see someone who doesn't finish a ton on the regional scene, then comes to the UFC and starts getting a lot of finishes. And that's kind of what we've seen. 3 consecutive wins by Jun Young Park, all by decision. Obviously, the Stefan fight got ugly in terms of like the optics, but it certainly wasn't super close to a stoppage, I think. And if it was more so Park being more so Nchukwi being unable to get up from bottom, as opposed to Park really putting on a pace trying to finish the fight. So I don't think that Park carries a ton of finishing upside. And on the other hand, Rodriguez, he's a pretty hard hitter. But one thing I like the most about Park's game is he's durable, man. He's really a tough guy to put away. I know he was submitted by Anthony Hernandez in that UFC debut. Kind of a weird fight with the slam. It looked like he was certainly kind of held back by the slam a little bit in that fight. Looked like he was potentially hurt, and then obviously he was submitted that after that. But he's never been knocked out. I just kind of think that this is two guys where one doesn't have much finishing upside, and the one who does have finishing upside is facing someone who has historically been super durable. So I like the over 2.5 rounds in this fight. I think it plays out close, man. I don't have a super good take in terms of the money line, John. Maybe you can help me out here. I'm leaning towards picking Park because I just think it's more likely that he spends time in top position in the fight. But I think it plays out super close. I'm really excited for this matchup. What do you have for me here in Park versus Rodriguez?
Yeah, I think that was a good breakdown. I'm actually on the other side. I think Gregory Rodriguez, and it's really just a slight edge. Like, I'm not betting him here, but I do give him the nod just in the sense that, like, yes, Park has shown to be historically pretty durable. He's a decent fighter. Like, he's not bad anywhere, but he's also not like great anywhere either. So it's kind of hard to cap his fights. Like, yes, he mixes in the takedowns, but it's usually against guys where we know he has a wrestling advantage, and against guys where he doesn't, the wrestling's just not there whatsoever. And in this matchup, like, I'm not convinced that he's going to be able to outmuscle and take down Gregory Rodriguez, who's going to be physically stronger than him. He's going to be bigger than him. I actually think Rodriguez is probably more likely to land takedowns here. Rodriguez is also a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Rodriguez is also more powerful on the feet. Jun Yong Park is not known for his power. And I think that's the way that you need to, you want to target fighters with power against Gregory Rodriguez, who has been knocked out multiple times. Like, he does have maybe a durability issue, but Jun Yong Park, like, he has a good jab, but he's not super powerful. So I don't even really think that's a threat here. So I just think Rodriguez is the one to be more dangerous on the feet, and honestly more dangerous on the mat as well. Like, I think he has him kind of covered here. So I actually like Rodriguez. It's not a bet for me, but if I had to pick a side, I think it'd be him. He's my preferred play on DraftKings as well.
All right, let's move on to the next fight here, John. We got your guy, Nikolai Mariano, coming off of a plus 210 upset victory against Alexa Kamor. He takes on Ike Villanueva, and the market has kind of flipped in this spot. We got Mariano minus 220 this time, as opposed to a plus 220 price when he was coming off of that long layoff before his last time out. And Ike comes back plus 185. The DK prices here. Nikolai is 9.1K. Ike comes back $7,100 on DK. And this is a bet I actually just made before the show began, and I bet the fight does not start round 3 at a minus 146 price on FanDuel Sportsbook. I played that for 2 units. It is my biggest bet on the card, and honestly, this was a fight where I saw it, and I was just kind of, first of all, obviously the first thing I thought of was you, John, and your big hit earlier this year when you're kind of on an island getting all sorts of shit throughout the week, planted your flag, got it right. But the second thing I thought of is, this is complete, like, light heavyweight shit show. I do not want to get involved. Like, I don't really know what to make of Mariano, and Villanueva is someone who I kind of just think stinks in general. And I know he fought up at heavyweight at the beginning of his UFC career. I don't even think he's really a 205, or he's like a inflated 185, or basically in terms of his body type. So this was a fight on the money line where I thought it made sense that Nikolai was a big favorite. Like, he's likely to land takedowns in this spot. Ike is pretty much early knockout or bust historically. So the price made sense where I wasn't really going to look into it anymore. But then I looked at the totals market here, and I just don't really see a way that we could ever get to minus 146 on the fight not to start round 3. You look at these guys' last 10 fights, both of them have only been to round 3 2 times. So that's a combined like 80% where they're finishing in the first 10 minutes. And then you just kind of look at the styles and you think about it, like, Ike Villanueva is a KO artist early in fights, and I think the biggest kind of knock on Nikolai is he's hittable early in fights. We've seen him rocked multiple times. He's a guy who's going to get hit early in fights. And with Ike Villanueva, the biggest knock against him is he just doesn't have a complete MMA game. Like, he has okay boxing, I suppose. He has power to put guys away early. Obviously, that's how his one UFC win has come. But we've kind of seen this guy, like, in any type of adversity he faces, he kind of just wilts under the pressure. We've seen him go down to a body attack his last time out. He has gotten beat up to the legs before. He's there to be hit in general. So I just think that violence is the play in this spot. I think that Villanueva either knocks him out early, and when I say early, I mean like round 1. And if he doesn't get that, like I think Nikolai could take him down. I think he could smash him on bottom. I think he could kick his legs. And I honestly think there's a chance he can knock him out on the feet. Like it's 205 pounds. But I'll pick Nikolai to win. I think he's the better fighter. But what I really like here is does not start round 3, minus 146 on FanDuel. I think that's good to like minus 185, maybe even minus 200. I think there's certainly a lot of room to play it. But lately, when I've been betting those props on FanDuel, the line has been moving pretty soon thereafter, which is not like a brag of some sort. Just like if you're watching the show live, I would go bet that now. Like if you're someone who typically likes to bet the fights Saturday morning, I'm not sure that this line is going to be around on Saturday morning. So yeah, does not start round 3 for me, minus 146, 2 units. John, anything here for you in the light heavyweight matchup?
Yeah, same goes for that Worthy Herbert fight. Doesn't start round 2, plus 180. Like that's off market. That's going to move.
Yep.
I'm plugging that again. If anybody's betting it live here watching the show. But in terms of this matchup, like coming into the week, like actually last week, I think I texted you or put it in the Discord, and I was like, man, Big Daddy Ike line seems a little bit wide here. But then, looking into the matchup, I think it's fine because Ike really just has like his path to victory is just a round 1 finish and a round 1 knockout. That's literally the only way he wins this fight. He cannot win a decision. He has about 3 to 4 minutes of cardio to land a big punch. Outside of that, like he's been knocked out many times. He's been submitted many times. Like you said, like the second that he starts to face any sense of adversity, like he just gives up. So it's like Negri Mariano, like I know he's not like a great fighter by any stretch, but I mean, he should have Ike covered here. And I know he's very hittable on the feet. We saw that in the Alexa Kamer fight, but he also showed good durability as well. And if Ike can't land that big punch in round 1, like I just don't see a path to victory for him here. So I think Nikolai lands takedowns. I think he could land, or he could finish the fight by TKO or by submission. I actually think TKO is probably more likely here, just because Ike like kind of shells up and doesn't defend. Once people start raining ground and pound, like he just shells up and lets the ref stop it. Like I don't think he's going to fight back much. So I actually think the TKO is probably more likely, but I do think Nikolai is actually pretty safe here, even though he's obviously not the greatest fighter in the world. Happy to cash the big underdog ticket on him against Kamer. But it's definitely a little sketchy to see him as minus 225. But again, I think he probably gets the finish here. I do really like the angle you played on fight doesn't start round 3, just because Ike almost always is ending the fight in the first round or being finished in the first round. If not the first, then he'll make it to the beginning of the second round and then get finished. So I would be shocked if this fight sees round 3. I'll either tail you on that or play one of these Nikolai TKO props or submission props. I actually didn't have time to see what FanDuel has for those. Probably my guess is they would have like plus 300, something like that, plus 280 on submission. TKO maybe a little bit higher. Like that.
It's flipped. So I think they have sub plus 420 right now.
That's
for
a little
Nikolai,
interesting.
and I think his KO is plus 220. So I think the general consensus agrees with you that the knockout is more likely, but it's possible that 420 is inflated. Like I think that price is bettable. I think it'll kind of be a situation potentially where like he gets on top, and it's one of those things where it's like he can just kind of finish the fight however he wants, sort of deal.
Yep.
And obviously you want a plus 400 instead of plus 200 in that situation, but certainly kind of a hard thing to project, I think, moving forward. Anything else here for you, John?
No, I think that's it. Like I said, I mean, it's going to feel a little bit sketchy, but I do think he's a solid play on DraftKings, and I think the props for Nikolai are probably pretty solid here. Or fight doesn't start round 3, like Jonah said, at what was it, minus 142? Is that what you
I think
said?
minus 146.
Minus 146. I think that's a really good number.
Yeah, I'm glad you turned it around. When I saw that Ike Villanueva text from you, I was like, these hoes ain't loyal, man. Like, no way he's going against this boy Nikolai. But I'm glad
I
I'm
couldn't
glad your
agree.
opinion has changed a bit. I see a comment in the chat. We might have to ban this guy, man. Talking about Andrew Sanchez round 3. I never want to see the Andrew Sanchez. I'm just kidding, obviously, but I never want to hear about Andrew Sanchez again. I never want to watch that bum fight after what he did to us last week as a minus 700 favorite on the live line and then just collapsing in round 3. Let's move on to, I believe, what is the first round, the main card. It may be a 6-5 main card. Regardless, a pretty interesting fight here. We got the two old men going at it. We got Francisco Trinaldo, the real old man here, I believe at 43 years old, minus 140 in this spot, $8.4 thousand against Dwight Grant, who's like sneaky old himself. I think he's 37 years old. And for some reason, I never think of him as a guy who's almost 40. Regardless, he's plus 120, 7.8K on DraftKings. John, this is an interesting fight here because these are two guys who are historically very low volume. One of them, and Trinaldo, obviously has a more kind of storied past, a more accomplished career than Dwight Grant, but it feels like these guys are just kind of going to go in there with the same game plan in terms of like a low pace, heavy power striking matchup. At least that's what it feels like to me. Who do you see winning a matchup like that? Like, can we really be backing Francisco Trinaldo at age 43 in spots like this where like he's just going to kind of sit in the pocket and slug it out with one punch every 30 seconds? Like, do you have any faith in Trinaldo as a favorite here at 43 years old?
I mean, you could definitely back him. I'm not going to, but gun to my head, if I had to pick a side, I probably would go on the Trinaldo side. It's just I don't want to be paying juice at minus 130. I do favor him in this matchup, but again, like I say this almost every single Trinaldo fight, like he's not a good round winner. Like a lot of his wins, it's like, people are scratching their heads and questioning if he actually won the fight because he doesn't win rounds convincingly. And on the flip side, like Dwight Grant is nothing special himself. Like you mentioned the age factor, but also the striking isn't super great. Like the durability is a little bit suspect. The grappling is a little bit suspect. Like, I don't know, man. I really don't have much interest in this fight. I would lean Trinaldo, but in terms of DraftKings, I don't really see a ceiling on either side. So in that case, like if I don't have a bet on it and I don't see the ceiling for DraftKings, I'm probably just going to stay away. So I'd pick Trinaldo, but again, it's not going to be a heavy target for me either way.
Yeah, I actually bet Trinaldo here at minus 120. I bet him for a unit, which might surprise some people. I typically am hashtag out on the hashtag old guys. Typically not my style here, but I just think that Dwight Grant is going to give Trinaldo like the exact type of fight he needs, right? Like it's not going to be a taxing style in terms of the pace. Any wrestling upside comes from the Trinaldo side. It's not like he's going to be defending takedowns. And I just think his striking is like better than Dwight Grant. And Trinaldo historically does not win rounds convincingly. Like I know that there's a decent chance that this fight goes to split decision and it doesn't feel great with a minus 120 number here. Like I don't think there's a huge edge. Like I probably wouldn't bet it at minus 130. And normally I say things on the show like, I think there's some room to play it. I'm usually like very specific with my unit sizing in the bet tracker because I don't want people to go like overboard on stuff that isn't huge edges. And I said this play is good till minus 125. Usually when I write that, like I think that it's still certainly a plus EV bet to play it to like minus 135. It just might not be a big enough edge that I want to risk it in a sport like MMA with so much variance. But this is a fight especially where like I would not play Trinaldo much past minus 125. Like I think he's going to get the style of fight that he's really successful in historically, but I could see it being close, man. He's 43 years old. Like I could see his durability being potentially shot, has been dropped in 2 fights in a row. But bottom line, like I just think he's probably 60% better than Dwight Grant. Like I think it's 60-40. I favor Trinaldo. I know it'll be close if it goes to decision, but I think they hit pretty much equally as hard, man. I've seen Grant get hurt before. It's not like this is some young kid going out there either. So I wouldn't be surprised with a split decision here. I guess I wouldn't even be surprised if Grant like goes out there and nukes Trinaldo in the first round. But for the most part, like I'm just gonna trust the historical trends behind Francisco Trinaldo. He does well in this style of fight, man. I think he wins, but I don't think the edge is huge. So I bet it at minus 120. Certainly not my most confident bet of the week, as you can probably tell. Let's move on to the next fight. We got 4 more left here going through UFC Vegas 41 on the Undisputed Show. Next one up is what I think is an interesting line, man. Like not a fight I've looked into a ton, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts here, John. We got Sungwoo Choi as a minus 290 favorite here against Alex Caceres plus 245. DK prices are Choi 9.2K and Caceres is 7K. And we gotta shout out Alex Caceres here, man. This is a guy who's been around in the UFC for a long time, pretty much alternating wins and losses, has put together a 4-fight win streak currently. I think the best win on the streak might be Chase Hooper. Actually, it's probably Steven Peterson. Yeah, his best win on the streak, as much as I want it to be Chase Hooper, is likely Steven Peterson. But certainly has not been fighting a great level of competition. Gets a step up here for sure against a guy in Sungwoo Choi, who you look at Choi and like this is a guy who I cashed on his last time out against Yusuf Zalal, or that was 2 fights ago. And he fought Julian Erosa, got the early KO his last time out. This is a guy who I think is pretty well-rounded. You know, his takedown defense is decent. Haven't seen him offensively grapple a ton. Certainly hits with some power, as evidenced by his KO. Erosa gets KO'd a lot, but like he certainly hits hard. I think it's a tough fight to read here, man, because I do certainly favor Sungwoo Choi. Like, I think he's the more well-rounded guy, probably. We know Caceres is one of those guys who needs a very specific fight to win. Like, if this is a kickboxing fight for 15 minutes, it's probably going to some sort of split decision. But we know historically that Caceres has been out-grappled significantly in some of his fights. I guess my read here that I'm struggling with is, like, how likely is Choi to out-grapple Caceres by a wide margin? And if he isn't likely to do that, then how could he beat minus 290 in this spot? I guess I'm just kind of struggling with capping the game plan from the Choi corner here, John. What are your kind of insights on this fight? Like, how do you expect it to play out stylistically and then also in terms of the betting market?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect Choi to out-grapple Caceres. I don't even think that'll be the game plan. Like, maybe you see some clinch work from him, some holding up against the fence, but I would be shocked if he looked to land takedowns here. And if he does, like, I'd expect him to get back up. Like, I wouldn't want him playing in Caceres' guard. Like, Caceres is the better submission grappler, but I think Choi is more powerful. He's a much better striker, comes from the Muay Thai background, former Muay Thai kickboxing champion, bronze medalist, Muay Thai over in Korea, world champion in Muay Thai. So, I mean, he's got the striking pedigree for sure. And I just think in terms of the striking, like he's going to be much better than Caceres. Caceres does throw decent volume, but it's a lot of like, you know, just low calf kicks, like a lot of weak stuff. Like Choi can walk right through the calf kicks. We've seen that in multiple fights from him. Like he's going to walk forward. He's going to be the aggressor here. He's going to be the one landing the big power shots. And I think he gets the job done here. I think it most likely comes from decision because Caceres has proven to be pretty durable outside of guys that can out-grapple him, like you mentioned. But I do think Choi, like knocking him out wouldn't shock me. But I do think more than likely it's probably Choi by decision. That would be the prop that I'd be looking to get if targeting the Choi side. But I think Choi's like a fine parlay piece as well. I think he's fine here. I think he wins. And I mean, have you seen Squid Games? Like Sung Woo, like you expect a guy named Sung Woo, he's going to lose when Squid Games is like the #1 show in the country. Like, come on, it's just not going to happen.
We have 2 South Koreans on this card. I think Jun Young Park as well is from South Korea. They might like be up there with the best South Koreans in the UFC at this point, like after Korean Zombie. Those are probably the top 3, but certainly I think that Choi is an intriguing prospect. I'll pick him to win this fight. I do think kind of the clinch game will be there. I do think he's the better striker. Something that I had sent to me today by a friend of the show, John the Martian, who hosts his own podcast. I think you could find it at John the Martian on YouTube. He does that with also another friend of the show, Ozzy. He sent me something about a plus 3.5 point handicap, and it wasn't his tweet. And I wish I knew. I wish I could double check who it was so I could give them credit. But someone was betting Caceres plus 3.5 on the points handicap, meaning that, you know, if it goes to the judges' scorecards, you add up all of the scorecards, and if it's like a football spread, if the judges' scores all added up cover 3.5 points in either direction, you win your bet. I didn't explain that great, but basically, like if there's a split decision of some sort, you win your Caceres bet, and it's like plus 3.5 minus 115. I think that's interesting, man, because I do think that Caceres is going to keep the fight relatively close on the feet. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm giving Choi a little bit more credit than you, but I do think he's going to have success in those cage sequences. I think he could land takedowns in this matchup. Like, I don't know. It's an interesting fight to break down. Certainly not one I feel great about. I'll most likely sit out, but I wouldn't be shocked if Caceres makes it like a close, classic Alex Caceres kickboxing match for sure. Let's move on to the featured bout of the evening. We got Jessica Rose Clark as a minus 160 favorite. She's $8,500 on DraftKings against Jocelyn Edwards. Comes back plus 140, 7.7K on Jocelyn Edwards. Jon, anything for you here? I'll let you go first and just kind of take this fight by the reins. Certainly been some money on Jessica Rose Clark in the market this week. She steamed up, opened like minus 140, went down to minus 120, now all the way up to minus 160. So was two-way action for a bit. Seems like a lot of Jessica Rose Clark backers out there in the market. What do you make of this matchup? Because Jocelyn Edwards is someone who I think there's a lot of divide in the UFC MMA betting space kind of on what to make of this girl. She's a little wild, but she certainly has athleticism. She's certainly able to make fights kind of into a frenzy that favor her style. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts here on Jessica Rose Clark versus Jocelyn Edwards?
Yeah, coming into the week, I thought I might be interested in a play on the dog here in Jocelyn Edwards, but looking into the matchup, I kind of lost interest. Like, I think it's lined probably appropriately, maybe a tiny bit of value on Edwards here now that it's minus 155 or whatever. But honestly, I think Rose Clark probably gets the job done here. Like, I think the striking's relatively even. I think she's probably the better pure boxer. You know, Edwards is probably going to be more diverse in her attacks in terms of the leg kicks, the body kicks. Like, she is explosive, like you mentioned. But I do think the takedowns could be a factor here. You know, Jessica Rose Clark, she has wrestled a little bit in her previous fights. I think somebody in the chat, put that she's been training with DC. He gave her the shout out on IG. Like, he was like, oh, or maybe it was Twitter, one of the two. He gave her a shout out. So I mean, that's kind of a spoiler, like, hey, she might wrestle here. But I mean, we've seen her wrestle in previous fights, so it wouldn't like that wouldn't shock anybody. You know, we saw her dominate Sarah Alpar, and Sarah Alpar obviously is not UFC level, but it was a good showing for her. And Jocelyn Edwards has proven that she can't defend takedowns. You know, from what we've seen, like even on the regional scene, she struggled to defend takedowns. So in a fight where I think the striking is pretty competitive, I'm just going to lean with the fighter that I think could land a takedown or two that has the capability to swing those close rounds. So I think Rose Clark is probably the side here. But minus 155, it's probably about right. Maybe even you could make an argument that it's slightly wide a little bit, but in terms of DraftKings, not a ton of interest here because Rose Clark, like, I don't think she lands like 3 or more takedowns here. And on the Edwards side, if she wins, it's going to come from a competitive striking based decision. So I just think there's better fights to target on DraftKings.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You know, shout out to those who got in kind of at the low prices on Jessica Rose Clark, those who bought the dip at like minus 120. I think they certainly got it in pretty good in this matchup. I expect her to be kind of the more technically sound striker, but I do think the striking is close. You know, Jocelyn Edwards is long for the division. She has a wide array of attacks on the feet, like you mentioned, Jon, mixes and kicks pretty well. Like, I do think that the striking will be relatively competitive. The thing that I think mostly favors JRC here, which you had mentioned, is the wrestling, right? Like, not only is Jocelyn Edwards easy to take down, she's very content to play guard off of her back. In her UFC debut in the first round against Wu Yanan, which was a fight she won, she threw up an armbar / triangle, like kind of progression of submissions off her back and was on her back for like 4 minutes of the first round in that fight. And, you know, at the super low levels, like, I think that's decent. But like, Jessica Rose Clark is a pretty defensively sound grappler. We haven't seen her put in like a ton of situations that make me think like, oh, there's no way that she's going to get submitted from the bottom or anything like that. But like, she's fought Paige Van Zandt, like she's fought people who are capable of getting submissions in the UFC. And I just don't think it's going to be to the point where like Jocelyn Edwards is really going to threaten off her back to win the fight. And more so, she's going to be doing herself a disservice, as most fighters do when they spend a ton of time prolonged on their back, not working to get up. So I think the striking is competitive, slight favor to Jessica Rose Clark there. I think if they were pure kickboxing, like the minus 120 price would make sense. But now that you mix in the grappling, like if Rose Clark shoots a takedown in every round, like she's going to look closer to minus 250, I think, as opposed to 150. But I think where we're currently at, where there's like a decent chance she wrestles and she'll be successful if she does, but there's also a chance that they kind of kickbox at range. I think the price right now, minus 150, minus 160 market wide, is pretty accurate. So no action for me. Shout out to those who got in early at like minus 120 on Jessica Rose Clark. Let's move on to the co-main event here. We got Grant Dawson as the biggest favorite on the card. Might be second biggest favorite on the card now that Mason Jones got a new opponent. But regardless, he's minus 450 here against Ricky Glenn. Ricky Glenn comes back plus 350 for Glenn, who Ricky Glenn, I mean, this is a guy who was coming off of an extremely long layoff prior to his last fight. I believe it was almost 3 years, and then knocked out Joaquim Silva in that fight in like 30 seconds, completely broke the DK slate. I think he was one of the first fighters to get like the first minute bonus that we now have as part of the DK scoring, but certainly was impressive there. However, we didn't see a ton from him in terms of like what he's been doing for the last 3 years. I know there are a lot of people saying like, oh, this guy's working full-time. As I think he was working like full-time as a plumber. We don't know what to expect. Yeah. And then he comes in and just gets the early knockout, which is great. He gets paid. He puts up a massive score on DK, but I still don't totally know where this guy is at physically, where this guy is at in terms of his skill set. Has he gotten any better in the last 3 years? Just one of those outcomes that doesn't tell us a ton. And then on the other hand, we have Grant Dawson, who I know there's some Grant Dawson haters out there, some people who are skeptical, and I think it's fair to be skeptical against like a really good top 15, top 10 level striker for Grant Dawson. But man, this is a guy who I certainly want to be like bullish on compared to the market moving forward. And obviously he's getting respect here at minus 450. I almost bet him last week at like minus 280. Really regret not pulling the trigger. I thought it was going to be maybe too chalky. Maybe we'd get some market love for Ricky Glenn coming off of the big result, but I passed. I ultimately waited too long until it was not really playable anymore. But Grant Dawson is not a train that I really want to get in front of anytime soon, especially against a guy who isn't a great striker like Ricky Glenn. He's going to embrace the grind, go to takedowns early and often. His striking is evolving a little bit. Still throws a couple of strikes like those like naked flying knees, which I don't love. Like he's certainly susceptible to getting hit, which I think is the main gripe people have against him. But for the most part, man, like this kid is a good wrestler, solid grappler. I think he covers minus 450 this weekend. Really nice stylistic matchup for him. Ricky Glenn has historically not stuff takedowns with pretty much any success. He's got a 67% takedown defense, but we've certainly seen him put on his back. We've seen him submitted a few times. I am backing Grant Dawson by submission here at plus 400 for a half unit. Opened at like plus 420 on FanDuel. Wasn't super high limits. The whole market kind of opened. I got that on Fox Bet. I bet it this morning. The market has kind of been moving plus 350 in some spots, plus 300. I think I even saw a plus 250 offshore. So if you have Fox Bet, I'd go grab some Grant Dawson submission at plus 400. I just think that if he's going to cover minus 450, he's going to spend a lot of time on top in this spot. And he's a pretty good grappler in addition to his wrestling. And Ricky Glenn isn't like a totally... he's not totally lost in jiu-jitsu. Like, I don't think he's going to get outclassed per se because he's bad. I just think that if Grant Dawson's on top of him for 10 minutes, the chances that he gets to his back, finds a choke, are better than a 4-1 odds would indicate. So Dawson by sub plus 400 for a half unit for me in the co-main event. John, any action for you here?
No action for me as of now. I like that look at plus 400 though. I did take a peek at the Dawson props. I think his double chance on FanDuel or ITD in terms of DraftKings, I think it was like plus 200. I don't think that's bad at all. Like you mentioned, like if Grant Dawson is going to spend like 8 to 10 minutes in top position, like he's probably either finding a choke or just finishing by ground and pound. So I do think Dawson is a strong play in DraftKings. Like Dawson's a guy you hit on the main thing is like the concern with Dawson is he gets hit too much. Like even in the fights that he wins, which he's won all of them in the UFC, he does eat some big shots. Now, I don't think Ricky Glenn is necessarily the guy to punish him for that. And I know that's kind of funny because he's coming off a first round knockout win, but Joaquim Silva, like, I mean, let's be honest, he's a little bit chinny. I don't think Dawson's going to stay at range too long before shooting takedowns. Like he typically ragdolls his opponents, lands multiple takedowns, and like you said, just breaks them over the course of 15 minutes. And this, like Glenn's a guy who you mentioned coming off major surgery, coming off a long layoff prior to his last fight. Like I still have some concerns with Ricky Glenn here. And I think Dawson, do I want to pay minus 425? Absolutely not. But I do think he wins the fight, and I think he probably gets a finish here. So I wouldn't mind taking a shot on the Dawson props. I would not play him at the money line, but I do think he's a strong play on DraftKings.
Yeah, hopefully he subs this guy, but like doesn't do it too dominantly, because I mentioned like I'm bullish on the guy, and it's easy to say when he's minus 425, but like he was scheduled to fight Caesar Ferreira, I think, in this spot, and what was like a closely lined fight. Obviously, it was canceled a few weeks out, so like it wasn't a mature market. But like I think we would have had a bet on spot there with a much more bettable line. And I do think that like for those of you who like parlays, I come on here and I say like don't parlay this guy. I wouldn't trust him at this price. Like I think Grant Dawson has the highest probability to win his fight out of all 14 fights this weekend. So I think he's the most likely to win. If I had to like gun to my head, pick someone to win this weekend, it would most certainly be Grant Dawson. I think he gets the job done. I think he does it pretty dominantly. Let's move on to the main event here, John. And this fight is happening at 195 pounds. We have had some fight week shenanigans going on. Paulo Costa reportedly 211 pounds on Wednesday at media day at the Apex. Marvin Vettori agrees, so 195-pound catchweight fight. We don't necessarily need to get into the details. I think he could have done better for himself in terms of, we don't know the details. Let's just put it this way. If you're giving a guy like Paulo Costa, who's been banned from fighting in the state of California because of how heavy he was walking on the cage against Yoel Romero, like this is a guy who is already massive in the cage when he has to cut down to minus 185. If you're giving him 10 pounds of not cut, and I know he kind of had to do it in order to save the fight and get paid his show money or whatnot, he better be getting paid. I hope Marvin Vettori did well for himself in those negotiations. But I guess before we get into the handicap here, John, we've seen Marvin Vettori get some money throughout the week. I bet him, full disclosure, at minus 130 at BetMGM. I think that was on Monday or Sunday. And he's up to consensus like minus 175 price. FanDuel is blown out to minus 192. I don't necessarily consider FanDuel like a market maker or a super sharp book to look at and be like, oh, this is where the market's definitely going to go. But there's certainly some places where like he's blown out to almost a 2-1 favorite. So a lot of Vettori money has come in. What do you kind of make of like everything that has happened for the last few days, John? And then I'll let you go first here. Like kind of what do you think of we'll go over what's going on outside the cage and then kind of how do you feel it plays out inside the cage? Because I think it's an interesting matchup, man, and certainly one that the market has had a strong opinion on throughout the week.
Yeah, I definitely liked Vettori coming into the week. Like I still would pick Vettori just because I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. We've seen him fight at 25 minutes if he needs to. Like that's something that I don't know if Paulo Costa can keep up a pace like that. Like, yeah, he went to decision with Yoel Romero. That fight was super high paced, but then we saw him come back in the Izzy fight and like the dude didn't do anything in that fight. And like, he just looked like, I mean, garbage. And it's just tough to know what to expect. Like if he comes out with like his old self, then sure, he's liable to knock anybody out in the first or second round. But outside of that, like I think Vettori, who we know is durable, we know has a sense of wrestling, and Costa does have good takedown defense. I think his takedown defense is like 80%. Yoel Romero, I think, was 1 out of 4 takedowns in that fight. And Romero's obviously an Olympic level wrestler, but I just think over the course of 25 minutes, once Costa gets tired, those takedowns will be there. And I just have to favor Vettori in a fight where, he's durable. I think he could take Costa's best punches. He's a solid kickboxer himself, and he has the wrestling and grappling upside. So I got to lean Vettori. Like you mentioned, I do have a little bit of concern that the fight is a catch weight. Costa won't have that bad weight cut, presumably. So maybe his cardio is a little bit better. He's obviously going to come in there big and heavy. And if he does come out like his aggressive self, I know Vettori has shown to be very durable, but like it's MMA, dude. Like Costa's super jacked, super powerful. Like he could put him out if he connects clean. So I think this is a fight that you could probably target both sides. Me personally, I would lean towards the Vettori side. I think you're on the same page, but let me know if I missed anything.
Yeah, so I bet Marvin at minus 130. I'm not totally sure what to make of the entire weight cutting issue. Obviously, the market seems to think it's a bad thing for Costa. I'm not 100% sold on that. He isn't cutting as much weight. I will note that, like, obviously guys who are bigger can cut, like, bigger in terms of, like, muscles can cut water weight a little bit faster. I mean, they're still depleting themselves, but, like, he was 211 pounds last night, did media all day, and he's going to have to make 195 tomorrow. Like, it's not like the weight cut is going to be insignificant for Paulo Costa. I'll say that much. And obviously, like I mentioned, this is a guy who cuts weight. He's used to cutting a lot of weight. Like, he'll pretty much surely move up to 205 after this fight. Like, this is a guy who at 185 has always had tough cuts to make it. So I don't think it'll play a huge role in the cage. in terms of a positive or negative. The one thing that I heard that was kind of like a red flag is when he was talking in his media day, and I don't typically listen to media stuff. I think it just kind of clouds my judgment. I like to just make my reads based on data points I've seen. He was saying like he'll disclose why he couldn't make weight after the fight. And, you know, Paulo Costa's like a wild card, right? Like he still claims he was drunk in the cage with Izzy, like hungover, slept for 2 hours, drank a whole bottle of wine or whatnot. But like, when you hear a fighter say like I'm not going to disclose why this happens, like it makes me lean towards either A, he wasn't training super hard in the last year and a half he's had off, or he had like some sort of injury in camp or has some sort of something going on that he doesn't want to disclose. He doesn't want his opponents to know about prior to the fight. So I think that is kind of like an interesting portion of it. In terms of how the styles break down, man, like I just think Marvin is super durable. I think he's probably the second best wrestler / grappler in the weight class, maybe the best one. I think Brunson's a better wrestler, but Vettori might be a better grappler. The problem is there aren't that many great grapplers at 185 pounds. So I don't know how much that says about him. I expect Paulo Costa to be able to stuff takedowns early in this fight. Had some really impressive defenses against Yoel Romero in that fight. But I just think the act of like pushing Costa against the cage, shooting takedowns repeatedly for Marvin here is going to be a plus for sure. So I think Costa has a chance to knock him out early in the fight. Something else I bet is I bet the fight does not go to decision at minus 115. I actually think that bet specifically had the most value added to it throughout fight week, because if Paulo Costa is going to come in heavier, it perhaps raises his chances for a knockout early in the fight. And if not that, it most likely says either this guy's going to gas out, this guy has an injury of some sort, this guy isn't taking fighting seriously at this point in time. So I think that the under has gotten to be like a progressively stronger play throughout the week. So I'll pick Vettori. I bet him at minus 130 for a unit and a half. I don't think I'm betting minus 175 at this point, especially with all the stuff kind of surrounding the fight. I do like the under still. I think you could get unders out there at like minus 130, 4.5. Like I still think those are solid. In my opinion, in terms of how we look at the fight. So I'll pick Vettori here. I think he gets the wrestling going towards the end of the fight. I think Costa's going to gas, man. Like if he can't get him out of there early, just the act of defending takedowns from Vettori. I wouldn't be surprised if Vettori loses one or both of the first 2 rounds, but I think Marvin comes back late here. I think he gets the win. I'll pick him, but I'm certainly not blind to the fact that Costa could win early. I will say I think it's pretty unlikely that Costa wins a decision. So I think one of my 2 bets will hit, and I'll pick Vettori by submission in round 3 or round 4. I think he just kind of wears on him and breaks him late in the fight. All right, John, we did it. That is 14 fights for UFC Vegas, 41 going down this weekend. Coming up, we got back-to-back pay-per-view events. I think we're going to get a couple of guests on the show. I don't know if we're going to disclose those right now, but we're looking to have guests for the UFC 267 card where you will be in attendance at Abu Dhabi, and then we're going to get a guest for the UFC 68 card back-to-back weeks for the November 6th card in New York, which I will be at. So certainly looking forward to breaking down those cards. But I think we did a good job today. 14 fights was certainly a lot. If you have anything to add in terms of general slate strategy on DK, the main event, any betting angles you think we missed, feel free to do so. And if not, take us out of here, my man.
Yeah, boots on the ground for the next 2 events. Love to see it.
Next 3,
if you guys
actually. Next 3.
Oh, is it next 3?
Well,
okay.
I'll be in Vegas for the Holloway fight. I'm going to be at the Apex.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, super exciting. Lot of good stuff coming up. As always, you can find the rest of our content at ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com. That's entirely free. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave us a 5-star review. We definitely appreciate it. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.